very lightly pressing with the round brush here, because if I press hard, it's going to start to just have this solid color, and I don't want that. I want to still be able to see. Hey, what's going on, everybody? In today's tutorial, I'll be sharing how you can make this painting in Procreate, so feel free to paint along with me, and let's get into it. All right, so before we begin, I will be using a canvas size of 3060 by 3060 pixels, so it is a perfect square. And the brushes I'll be using will be all Procreate default brushes, mainly from the painting section here. So I'll be using the round brush, the flat brush, and I will also be using the soft brush from airbrushing section, and some texture and organic brushes. And these are all Procreate default, so no need to worry about any extra brushes or anything like that. So to start this one off, I'm going to choose an airbrush and make sure it is set to the soft brush. And I will get in a warm, lighter color. So I'll choose maybe this very light orange color, and I'm just going to paint in the whole canvas with this airbrush. And I will then grab maybe a slightly more red color here, maybe more saturated, slightly darker. And I'm just going to softly paint in this diagonal stroke here. Again, very softly using the airbrush, so I'm not pressing too hard. We have the pressure opacity on, so how hard I press will determine how much paint is put down. And then I can sample this lighter color and just go back over the edge a little bit to have more of a soft transition until we build up a gradient that we like. From here, I will select a slightly cooler color, so I may bring this into like cooler reds, maybe this kind of pink color here, and maybe a little darker and slightly more saturated. Again, we're not going too much with these changes. They're very subtle changes. And I'll start to paint in another kind of diagonal stroke right here with this paint color. And we can do the same thing, sample this previous color and just soften out the edges here. And then to complete this gradient in this top corner here, I'm going to select a blue kind of purple color, maybe a little more neutral, and maybe a little darker, and just paint in this top right corner here, and maybe a little bit on the top of the screen right here. And one final thing, I will select this color here, this lighter color that we painted, and I will get in an even lighter, maybe close to white, pretty much a white color with the airbrush right here. And I'm just gonna paint this in. So now we have a nice gradient from this very light white color into these kind of oranges, into these more very desaturated reds, and then the purples, and then this kind of this blue purple up here. So we have a nice gradient. And if you need to, you can go up here to the adjustments tab and go to Gaussian blur, and you can increase the Gaussian blur to if you want your gradient to feel more soft and have a softer transition between the colors, you can do that. So if you tap on the screen, you see this menu, and you can tap on preview and see what it was like before and now what it's like after. And you can see it just softens everything out. I'm not going to do it. I don't think I need to do it much, so I'm just going to undo that there. But you can do that if you're having trouble getting a nice soft transition between the colors. All right, so for the next step, I'm going to create a new layer. So I'll go up to the layer panel, and I'll tap on the plus icon, and I'll go to brushes, and I'm going to select a painting brush here. So I'll just use the round brush. It's a pretty simple brush. We don't have to worry about textures or anything right now. And I'm going to select a cooler color, so maybe a neutral purplish blue kind of down here, and we don't want it too saturated or anything. And I'm just going to start with this round brush, painting in, starting on the left side of the screen here, painting in this mountain shape. And I'm really just kind of drawing the silhouette here, just drawing the edges. And we want this to feel just like a flat color silhouette. We're not going to see too much detail on it, so we don't need to worry about any other colors or form right now. We're just worrying about the silhouette. And so I think this shape is good, and we can paint in everything below this shape. So everything down here, we can just paint this in with a round brush. And again, this brush, you can use any brush you really want, as long as you're getting a nice clean shape. And then after having the shape in, I'm going to just edit some of the silhouette. So I'll just draw on the edges here to kind of further strengthen the silhouette and maybe just refine and clean some of this up. We want this to feel natural, almost like a hill kind of. It's not a massive rocky mountain, but it's more of these hills. Maybe it's covered in trees, but this is going to be kind of a dusk or maybe a sunrise scene or a sunset scene. So it's going to be mostly like a silhouette. We're not going to see too many details or anything like that, but it is in terms of the form and the overall shape, it's not going to be a super rocky, pointy mountain. It's going to be more of this rounded kind of hill type of mountain. And we can use the erase tool, and I have mine set to the round brush here, and I'll just use it to maybe erase some of the edges out too. And this is just subtracting from the silhouette shape that I've already made. If you're happy with your shape, you may not need to do this, but it is a good way to just kind of clean things up and get it exactly how we want it. And it doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, it most likely won't be. So sometimes it's good just to move on at some point. We don't want to spend too long on that. So I think I'm going to move on from this. I'm going to make it a little darker. So I'll go up to the adjustments tab, go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'll turn down the brightness to about 49% here. And I'll shift the hue more into the blues. So I'm actually going to take this little dot and push it to the left to about 47%. And I know I said I'm pushing it into the blues, but it's actually the opposite with the slider because I was already in the purple, so I need to pull it more to the left to get it to have more of a blue color to it. So we'll go to about 47%. I can tap on the screen, tap on preview, and that's what it was like before, and this is what it's like now. And maybe I'll go a little darker, so maybe we'll go to 48% with the brightness, and that works. And we'll just tap on the adjustments tab again to complete the selection. All right, so now that we have this shape in here for the mountains, we have it on a separate layer from the sky. And I'll create a new layer above layer 2. And we're now going to get some foreground in here. So we want these hills, these kind of step-like hills. We're just going to grab a kind of a yellow-green color, somewhat saturated, not too bright, but maybe like a mid-tone color here with maybe a little more yellow than that. And we'll just paint in. I'm just using the round brush here. Again, not worrying too much about textures. We just want these shapes so we can add textures to them later. And we just have this horizontal line and then kind of go down a little bit like a step and then come back like a horizontal line, dip down again, and then come out of the canvas like that. And we can just fill in this shape, again, just using the round brush. Maybe I'll do another step up here. So we have these steps, right, going down. And we'll add some form to them later to make them feel more three-dimensional. But for now, that should be okay. And maybe we can make this slightly greener. I feel like it's a little too yellow right now. So I'll go up to the adjustments tab, hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'm going to shift this more into to the right to about 50. We'll go to about 52%. And I'll turn the saturation down to about 47%. Maybe the brightness down to about 49. And I'm just kind of adjusting the colors here, and we can see what it was like before and now after. And I think I like that better. So we'll just confirm that adjustment by pressing the adjustments icon at the top left. And a lot of times when painting, I like to play around with the colors a little bit, and I won't actually know the color that suits the painting best until I start to get all the values and all the different colors in. So it's okay if you don't know immediately which color you want to use. I oftentimes don't at all. So you'll notice once you start to get certain colors on the canvas, they'll look and feel a lot different than how you thought they might. So a lot of it is just experimenting and just playing around with things to see how they all play together. For this next step, I'll go to layer 2, which is the mountain layer here, and I'm going to create a new layer above it. And I will go to the brushes tab and tap on the Salamanca brush. And this is more of a painterly brush, but we can use this to get a nice kind of a tree feel in. So we're on layer 4 above layer 2. I'm going to select a darker green color, make it a little more green, have it pretty dark and not too saturated. So maybe down here, maybe a little more green than that. And I'm just going to paint in using this brush, these round paint strokes. And I really like the way that this brush gives this painterly kind of feel. And it feels kind of like this natural tree shape, or at least this painterly like tree shape. And we'll just get these shapes in here. Maybe we'll have a little taller one over here, and maybe another taller one right here. But we want it to feel natural, right? We don't want them to all be the same size. So just have some nice variety with the tree shapes. And as usual, we'll add more detail to this later on. I'll go back to the brushes, and I'll go to the artistic brushes, and I'm going to select the hearts brush, and I'll just paint some more with this, maybe these kind of vertical paint strokes here, just to get some more tree shapes in here and some variety of paint strokes that we can play with. Because again, later on, we will come back and add some more values and some more form to these trees. But as of now, we're just kind of laying in the foundation for everything. All right, and I think I'm good with that. I like how that looks. Now I think we can move on to the next step. So we're going to go back to layer 3, and I'm going to create a new layer above layer 3. So tap on layer 5 now and set it to clipping mask. And now everything that we paint on layer 5 will only show up within this grass layer below it. So the clipping mask keeps everything confined to the layer that it's attached to. We can use this to create detail without having to worry about breaking the silhouette of the shape that we've previously made. So I'm going to go to the brushes and choose the drawing section, and I'll select the evolve brush, and I'm just going to sample this color here that we've painted already for the grass, and I'll make it just slightly darker, not too much. So you can see it's really not too much of a difference here, but it is darker. And I'm just going to start to paint in some of these paint strokes here, and we want them to kind of curve like this, right? So they're a little curved, so we get some of this form in here, and it starts to curve back towards us. So I can sample this color that we've already painted here with this green and just paint back into the darker parts if I need to clean some of it up. And so we kind of have this curved shape here. I'm going to go in with an even darker color here, just slightly darker green, and just paint in some more paint strokes here, varying the size. And this brush, the harder you press, it creates bigger strokes. So it's got a pressure size to it, which is nice. So you can kind of control it that way. And we just want to get in these dark parts of the steps here of this grass. Maybe we'll go a little darker than that as well, just to get in the middle, kind of deepest dark parts of the shadows here. All right, and I will switch brushes here. Maybe I can go to the inking section and use the thylacine brush. And I like this brush because it gives a nice rake feel, but if I use it on a layer that already has paint on it, you can see the brush kind of has this, it kind of looks blurry. You see whenever I paint it, but if we go on a new layer without any paint on it, the brush has a much different feel. You can see this one feels a lot more crisp. And so I like to just keep this brush on a separate layer because it avoids that kind of blurry feel. So I'll just create a new layer above this. So now layer 6, just to get this thylacine brush texture in here. So I can just paint these rake-like textures in here to get some more of a kind of an individual grass blade feel. And I don't want to overdo it because this brush can be overdone if I'm not careful, but just here and there to get some textures, right? So then we can go up to the organic brushes, and I can tap on the swordgrass brush, select the swordgrass brush, and maybe just tap in some of these shapes down here. So this kind of does like some stamps. So if we see up here, if I tap, it gives a grass kind of stamp, and it gives a variety of them. So we can just tap and get some of those in at the bottom of the screen. So down here at the bottom right, I'll just tap one of these in, we may have to play around with it to get the right size. So yes, maybe something like that should be fine. And I'll just tap a few of these in here to get some grass blades and just to have that bit of, I guess, realism to make it feel a little more realistic. It's kind of abstract, but we'll start to refine things and clean things up in a moment. So from here, I'll go back to the painting section of brushes, and I'll use the round brush. And I'm just going to start to manually kind of paint some of these textures in by hand. So just selecting this darker green color here and just getting in some of these grass shapes. And I am still on this thylacine layer, so it doesn't matter too much. We can collapse layer 5 onto layer 3 if needed. In fact, we could collapse all these, so layer 6 onto layer 3 as well, just to save some layer space. Now I'm breaking the silhouette a little bit to have these kind of grass blades pop out of the silhouette, because here, see, it seems kind of almost too much like an inorganic shape. But once we start to break that silhouette a little bit, maybe I can use the flat brush as well. Once we break the silhouette, it will feel a little more like a natural grass. We're going to get a darker value in here for sure. I think we can definitely use a darker value in a moment, but we'll get to that. I'm just building up these shapes to make it really feel like there's grass here. And I don't want to do too much with this, because if I start to just paint every individual blade of grass, then it will start to get very, very noisy. And that's not what I'm going for. I want to give the impression of grass without having to do too much painting. So, texture brushes and grass brushes come in handy for sure, but we can also just imply a lot of that by how we paint our detail. So here I'm still using a flat brush, and I'll just keep it down to a low size and maybe just paint in these grass-like paint strokes here, just coming out of the greens and into the darker parts. It just creates a nice natural kind of grass. All right, so I'm still working with this grass here. I'm going to just keep using the flat brush, and we're just on layer 3. And if you like to keep your layers separate and just to keep everything clean and everything like that, that's perfectly fine. I just collapsed mine to save some space and just have to not have to worry about which layer I'm on. Sometimes that can be more of a hindrance than helpful. So at least in my opinion. So, but do what works best for you. And I'm just painting in these kind of these darker values here with this flat brush, and just shaping the form here. I'll flip the canvas a few times just to see how everything's coming along. I think it's still in a pretty messy stage right now, and that's fine. Usually these things start off in a pretty messy stage, so no worries about that. I'll go to the vintage brushes, and I'm going to select the rad brush, and it's just this kind of a textured brush here, and it kind of gives these shapy kind of textures that I think can work well for the grass. And maybe we'll grab this darkest value here that's on the grass, and I'll make it slightly darker and just paint in some of these shapes here just to get more shapes that we can play with. So a lot of times if I do use a shape texture brush, I get down the shapes and then I can kind of sculpt those shapes and erase into them and maybe paint on top of them to have kind of a base to paint with. A lot of times that can be helpful for me. I try not to just keep the shapes as they are from the brush because, like I've said before, they can be pretty repetitive. So I always like to add my own paint strokes to it or erase into them just to edit them a little bit. I'll go back to the round brush here and just go to the painting brushes, round brush, and just paint in some more values here and just kind of bring this down a little bit. And there's a lot of different ways to paint grass. I don't have one particular way that I paint. A lot of times I just kind of do how I'm feeling in the moment. There's definitely some grass texture brushes that can make this easier. For example, I have some right here. Like this, for example, is just a stamp brush that I've made that kind of gives these grass shapes in here. This is available on my Patreon page if you're interested. It's just a way to get some of these quick grass shapes in here, and you can see it kind of creates this silhouette for these blades. And then we can go in with like a round brush and just paint over that. But if you don't have a grass texture brush, that's fine. This really can be done by hand, and it doesn't need to be, you don't need a specific brush really. But like I said, I just kind of do what I feel in the moment. A lot of times I will use grass texture brushes just to get a quick variety of textures and details in there, and then we can, like I said, paint over with a round brush and just kind of clean up and edit some of the shapes. But there are definitely a lot of good textures that you can get creative with, even in just the Procreate brushes that are pretty useful in creating some unique textures. It's just really about getting creative with it and seeing seeing just how you can kind of make grass out of maybe a texture that you wouldn't think would be grass. Like for example, this rad brush in the vintage section doesn't really look like grass, but you can see I'm using the texture to kind of help develop some of this grass here. So it's just about kind of getting creative with it, I guess. I'll go back to the Evolve brush here and just continue to paint in these shapes. Now I'll go and create a new layer above layer 3 and do the same thing like we did earlier. So just tap on the layer and set it to clipping mask. And I'll go back to the brushes and I'm going to select on an airbrush, and I'm just going to sample one of these darker values, these darker greens that we've painted. And I just want to softly airbrush the top of this grass layer just to get some darker parts right here, because I feel like, and maybe down here as well, I feel like it was a little uniformly similar in the value. So I'm just introducing a slight gradient on top of the details that we've painted. So maybe like a little bit of a shadow. And this is it before, and this is it with it. And if we feel like we've done too much, we can just go to the erase tool, select the soft brush, and we can just erase some of it out if we want to take some of that away. or I can just turn down the opacity of the layer here if I want to. And maybe I'll turn that down to about 90%. So now I'm going to collapse layer 5 onto layer 3. Then I'm going to sample this green color here. And I want to get more of a yellow. So I'm going to shift more into the yellows, maybe have it more saturated. And I'm going to select the flat brush from the painting section. And I'll just paint in some more of this grass here. Maybe a little darker than that. I think that was a little too drastic of a change. We just want to get these yellow kind of tips of the grass here. So just paint this in, and I'll use the selection tool as well and just kind of select in or just create these selections for this nice kind of this grass shape here, these pointed kind of these peaks on top of the selection, and then just paint it in with the flat brush. Now we have something that kind of resembles lighting on this grass, and maybe I can just bring it down a little bit more, something like this. And sometimes the details can kind of become overwhelming when you're painting and you kind of get lost in the details. So I try not to zoom in too much. And sometimes I try to squint when I'm looking at the details, so I'm not taking in all details at once. I kind of just see the shapes as they are shapes rather than the individual little details within the shapes. So I think squinting your eyes can kind of help with that sometimes. And I'm just drawing in some extra details here for maybe some light hitting some of this grass, or maybe just some more yellow grass blades. Maybe we'll get a little bit of a darker value in here and just continue to build up this grass here. It's just one of those things that takes time. It takes just some patience to build this up, because it may take a little while and you may have to keep on trying out different textures and just slowly building this up. But it is something that we don't want to get too caught up in, right? So we don't want to get too lost in these details and worry about things that may not help with the bigger picture. So it's good to stay zoomed out and to kind of just be aware of what you're doing, because it is really easy. And I know for you, just from personal experience, that it's easy to get lost in kind of just mindlessly rendering and mindlessly detailing. And I've definitely had that happen before. So just try to stay focused on the bigger picture, right? And I'll use the erase tool, set it to round brush, and I can just erase into some of the edges here. Maybe to just have more of a grass-like feel. All right, so I think we can take a break from the grass layer. I think we've done enough here. Okay, I'm okay with how the textures are. We may want to add a little bit to them later, maybe some color variety to them later. Maybe I'll just get one last paint stroke of this yellow kind of feel right here, maybe right here as well. So we'll just sample this yellow color and just make these selections and just paint them in here. So I'll move on to the next step here. So we're going to work with the trees. I am going to go to the tree layer, layer 4, and start to just build in some more value. So we have this pretty solid value here, this darker green. I'm going to shift it more into the yellows just slightly, take it up more into the green. So just increase the value a little bit, maybe increase the saturation slightly. And I'm using the flat brush here, and I'm just going to paint some paint strokes down here at the bottom. Maybe that's a little too light, so we'll just make it a little darker. And just very, very subtle indication of maybe some bushes or maybe some of the lower parts of the trees down here before we get deep into the forest part. And after we have that, we can go and tap on a new layer above layer 4, tap on the layer, tap on clipping mask. And now I'm going to use the Salamanca brush here, and I'm just going to paint onto these trees just to get more of a texture. And again, there's a clipping mask layer, so everything will be confined to this shape of the trees that we've made. So we're just getting a little bit of a lighter green in there. And I'll collapse this layer now just to keep the layers clean. And now we're going to be painting on layer 4. So I'll go to the painting section and go to the round brush, and I'll just paint in some of these trees. I'm going to use a selection tool here just to get some of these clean shapes in here for the trees. So I'm just making the selection and then filling it in with the round brush and just kind of painting over these paint strokes that we've made. I'll do another one here. So again, just using the selection tool. So I'm tapping this S-shaped icon at the top left, and I'm making the selection. I'm drawing it in using the freehand tool, and I'm tapping on this gray circle here to complete the selection, and I'm just filling it in with the round brush. And we can do multiple of these, so I'll just tap on the gray circle here to complete that one, and maybe I can do another one right here. And then tap on the gray circle, maybe another one right here. All right, complete that selection. We'll do several of these, and then once we have enough, tap on the brush up here and just paint all of them in at once, and that kind of saves some time. And so I'm just flipping the canvas to see how everything looks together. And I like how it's looking. I think that we can maybe erase into some of this tree here just to have more of a tree-like, leaf-like feel. I feel like it was kind of abstract before, so maybe I'll just erase some of this so we can see through some of these leaves here into the sky behind it. And then we can just go back to the brush and maybe paint in some of the parts that we erased out just to have it feel a little natural. Just adding and subtracting to the shape like how I did with the mountain earlier. And we'll go back in over here just using the selection tool again and just continue to build up some of these selections. And I like the variety that I have. So some of these trees feel more like pointed evergreen trees, and then some of them feel more like kind of more of these messier like leaf trees, right? Rather than these evergreens. So it's just some variety. And then we have the variety in the values too. So we have these darker selections here, and then we have these lighter, slightly lighter, not too much. We don't want too much contrast, but there's enough contrast to know that there's a variety of trees that we have. I think we can go on a new layer below this. So we'll go to layer 2 and tap on the plus icon. So now we have a layer behind these trees. And I'm going to just sample this light green here, maybe make it a little lighter. And I'm going to use the flat brush, and I'm just painting in some more paint strokes behind these trees just to create more depth behind the forest. And maybe I'll go to the layers and I'll tap on the N. And I'm just going to bring down the opacity a little bit so it doesn't feel like it's as close up. Maybe I can tap on the move tool, go to distort, and just squash it down a little bit, just so it feels like it's a little further back there. And maybe it starts to slope down. So it just gives more depth between the trees and this mountain layer right here. All right, so now I'll go back to the tree layer, tap on the plus icon to make a new layer. And a lot of times I'll do this if I'm going to test something out or just see how something looks. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to test out a selection here, just making a kind of this tree shape selection. And I'm going to paint it in with more of an orange color just to get some variety of color within these trees. Maybe have some more reds in there as well. And I think that this is slightly too bright. There's too much contrast here. So I'll just go up here to the adjustments and turn down the brightness and the saturation a little bit until it feels like it blends in more with the trees. And then I'll sample that color and I'll make a few more of these, maybe these little bushes. And I'm just using the selection tool to create some of these shapes here. So just maybe another color variety of plants that are within this forest. And that will help add some interest and just some pops of color. I think it's really just an excuse to get some more color variety in there. So now we've introduced some reds into these greens, or some of this kind of this neutral orange into these greens. And I feel like that really helps. Now I'll go back to layer 3 and I'm just going to work with some of these grass textures again before we move on to the mountain in the background. I just want to clean some of these shapes up, and there's just a few things that after taking a little bit of a break from it, I see that I would like to be a little different. So sometimes I find that is a good way to just step away from what you're working on and to come back and see what it looks like later. That can be a good way to kind of see anything that may stand out as maybe something you want to change or something that may not look too great. And so I'll do that sometimes. Like if I'm working on a particular area or a particular detail, I will take a break from it for a little while and just see how it looks. And if I really feel like I need to add more to it later, then I will. But sometimes I don't even need to. So it can save you from having to just keep on rendering something, keep on detailing something, and kind of pull you out of that. That's why I kind of like to jump around, work on different things on the canvas sometimes. So I'm going to create a new layer above layer 3 now, tap on the selection tool and make sure it's set to freehand. This is kind of an organic way to get in grass. So without having to use a grass brush, I can just make these selections in here, these grass blades. And I usually do this in the foreground. The foreground is the closest part of the scene to us. And this grass will most likely be seen in the foreground like this because it's, so big and so close to us. So I wouldn't do this far back because then it's going to be too much detail that we wouldn't be able to see in reality. So just making a bunch of these selections here, tapping the gray circle. And it may be hard to see, but you can kind of see the selections that I've made here. And I'm going to paint these in a moment. But for now, I'm just making a bunch of these. So I'll go up to the brushes whenever I feel like I have enough made, and I'll go to the airbrushing brushes, go to soft brush, and I will sample this yellow color here, and I'll just paint in just the top parts so it has a nice kind of transition. You see the grass blade transitions from this dark color here up into the lighter colors on the very tips of the blade. Just creates a nice little gradient there, and I'll do that for these over here as well. And they don't have to be yellow. I mean, I could probably get away with maybe like an orange or maybe like a red for some of them. Maybe we'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that for some of them. I think that creates just some nice color variety in here. So some of them I'll leave this as this green color, but I kind of like what that orange adds to the green that we have here. So a lot of times I like orange and green, having those kind of like having bits of orange paint in the grass, I think helps a lot sometimes. That's just a personal kind of color preference that I have sometimes. So, and reds as well are really nice. That's why I got some of those in the trees up here. And now I'll do another layer above this and go to inking, and I'm just going to do the same thing with the thylacine brush again. Just paint in some of these rake-like textures. Again, don't want to go overboard with this because that will happen if I'm not careful. But I do just want to get some of this stylized kind of paint stroke in here. And I have a lighter value selected, right? This green color. So it's kind of creating this highlight or this pop of color in some of this area. I'll pull this layer. This is the thylacine layer that we were just working on. I'll actually pull this below layer 7. Just because I just want it below these grass blades, and I'll collapse layer 8 onto layer 3. So, and then I'm going to go to painting section, select the round brush. I'm going to sample this light color here, and I'm just going to wash over some of these darker areas just to remove some of the contrast that I have. I felt like it was a little too much contrast. And just paint over some of this to get a nice, more of a grouped color, right? More of a grouped value. And again, this brush has pressure opacity, so I'm just very lightly pressing with the round brush here. Because if I press hard, it's going to start to just have this solid color. And I don't want that. I want to still be able to see these values beneath it. I just want to lighten all the values beneath it. So but I don't want to lighten this green here. So I'm sampling this color, so it can't get any lighter than that, right? But these other darker values below it can. So I'm just slightly lightening those a little bit. And I'll just make some more broader brush strokes just to kind of group these values a little bit better. So you can see I started off pretty messy, and I'm kind of bringing things more together to feel a little cleaner and a little more grouped. And a lot of times it's just about sticking with it and getting through that messy beginning portion of painting. But just try not to get caught up in the details, because I know I've said that quite a few times already, but I just really think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is just not focusing or worrying too much on specific individual details, and just try to zoom out. So just try to make sure you stay zoomed out, and it may help to squint so you're not really picking up all the details and you just see the shapes for what they are, and just try to play with those shapes and group them in a nice way. And I know it's easier said than done, but if you practice and you just keep that in mind, it can definitely get easier. All right, so I have this grass and I'm pretty happy with how the textures and details look, but I do want to darken it. The only issue is I don't want these dark parts to get much darker, because as you see, if I darken it, they'll start to feel almost like almost close to a black color, and I don't really want it to be that dark. I feel like it's too a little muddy in a way. I don't know. So I'll undo this, and what I'll do instead is just sample this darkest color here, and this is going to be very similar to what I did earlier with painting over to lighten everything except for the lighter parts. So I'll sample this darker value here, and I will create a clipping mask layer above layer 3. And with this darker portion, this is the darkest part of the grass that I've painted, so I'll select that. And with this, I will just probably put the opacity of this round brush down to about 10%, and just very, very lightly paint over all of this. And so what this is doing is darkening everything except for those dark values, because the color is already that value, if that makes sense. And then we can see, see before and after, and I feel like it just turns down the brightness of those bright areas just enough. And it won't affect these because, again, it is the same value as this, so it can't get any darker than this. So this area won't get any darker because this color is the same value as it. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just an easy way to get everything a little darker without affecting a specific area. You can also change the curves as well, but just to keep it simple, I'll just do it that way for now. And then we can collapse this layer whenever we're finished, just to clean it up. But this will almost make it in a way permanent. So if you're not certain that you want to do that, you may want to keep it on a separate layer, and that way we can always delete it. But I'm pretty certain I'll go with that. So I'm just going to collapse this. Now, one thing I'll do is go to layer 1 and increase the saturation of the sky a little bit here, maybe to about 60%. And I think that looks a little more vibrant. And I'll go to the mountain here. Now we can start to get in just some subtle form on this mountain. Like I said earlier, this is a silhouette, so it's not going to have too much form, but we can sample this color and maybe make it a little darker. And I'm just going to paint in on this one side of the mountain, maybe some form here. And we can sample this color here again and just paint some of that out if we feel like we did too much. It would probably be good to do this on a clipping mask layer, but it doesn't matter that much if you're comfortable with, just keeping things clean, because we don't want to break the silhouette and kind of make things messy like that. So, but if you would prefer, you can just make a new layer on top of it and just to keep things cleaner. So we're just really adding in some darker parts to this mountain, maybe some shadows, and using the round brush and just slowly building up this value here. Maybe I'll make a new layer above it because I still feel like there's a lot of space in between these trees right here in this mountain. So I'll sample this mountain color, make it a little darker. We're on a new layer above this, so layer 8. And I'm just going to paint in maybe another mountain right here. Maybe just another mountain shape using the round brush. Maybe just something like that should be fine. And then I can move it if I need to. I'll go to the move tool, it's set to distort, and I can kind of just play around with how it's sitting in here. And it's a little dark, but I think this background mountain can be a little darker. So I'm going to take layer 2 and just go up to the hue, saturation, and brightness sliders, turn down the brightness to 49% should be good. And then I'll create a new layer above layer 2. So now we're on layer 9. I'll go to the airbrushing section, the soft brushes, and I'll just sample maybe this light orange, very, very light orange color here, and just paint in with a soft airbrush some atmosphere in between these mountains. And I'm going to do the same thing in front of layer 8. So I'll go to layer 8, make a new layer, and just paint this in as well using the round brush. And I'll turn down the opacity if I feel like it's too much. Don't want it to be too strong, just some subtle atmosphere, right? And I think that's good. So now I think we can get some clouds in on the scene. So I'll go to the sky layer and tap on the plus icons and make a new layer. I'll go up to the brushes and I'll select the round brush, and I'll just sample this pink color in the sky, or this kind of light orange color. And I'm going to shift it more into the reds and shift this slightly down, so just a slighter, darker value and maybe a little more saturated. And I will paint in some clouds, and I'm just using the round brush, just using some kind of these stylized round shapes for these clouds. And I just want to get in the flat shape. We're going to get in some textures and details onto these clouds later, but for now I'm just keeping it as simple as I can, just to get this placeholder shape down. And as usual, just make sure we're getting a nice variety of shapes in here and a variety of sizes for these clouds. We just want to have a nice variety and just make sure they're not too repetitive. So maybe I'll get some down here behind the mountains, and maybe I'll get some down here, over here, more in the lighter parts. And this is there's way too much contrast right here, but I will add a clipping mask layer in a moment, and I'm just going to lighten this cloud so it won't look this dark. But again, just getting in the placeholders right now, so no need to worry about that. Maybe I'll connect these shapes here, and we can erase some of these shapes out as well. And again, just I know these are very stylized, but I kind of just like the way that these round shapes look, and they're easy to make just using the round brush. So I really like these clouds behind the mountain here, and I'll just refine some of these other ones up here that I think could use just a little more work. We don't want to get too many in here. I don't want it to feel too noisy, so I do want this a nice area of rest, and then we have these areas of noise with the detailing. I want to be able to balance that well, so that's something that I'm keeping in mind right now. And sometimes it's good to just test things out, so just test and see. Maybe a cloud right here would look good, but maybe not. One of the nice things about digital painting is you don't have to commit to anything if it doesn't look good. So, all right, I will go with these for now. I think this looks good enough to move on. I'm going to go and create a new layer above the cloud layer and set it to clipping mask. And I'm going to select a airbrush from the soft brush from the airbrushing section, and I'm just going to make sure that we have this cloud color sampled. And I'm just going to make it slightly lighter and more into the oranges, maybe a little lighter than that. And I want to just hit the edges of some of these clouds, especially these clouds up here, the bottom parts of the clouds. I want to just hit those with this lighter color because the sun is somewhere down here, below the horizon, right? Because this is either a sunset or a sunrise. So the bottom parts of these clouds are going to just pick up a little more light than the back parts are. So we can just softly paint these in. Not much of a difference, but it is something subtle. And like I said, this one here, I'll probably make lighter. So I'll just sample this color here and I'll just paint that in so it feels much more like the sun is affecting the overall color, and it's just much less contrast. And I'll create a gradient on these two and just softly transition from this lighter part of the clouds into this darker, deeper pink color. And to be honest, I think that layer one could be slightly darker. I think this is just too bright in this whole area. Now that we have the elements in, when I painted this in earlier, I didn't know, how all the shapes would look. So I'm just going to sample this color here, and I'm using the airbrush, and I'm just going to paint into some of this white down here because I felt like it was just too much space that it was taking up. So we'll just reduce some of the size that the really white part of the sky had. And maybe I'll get another streak of purple in here maybe. And another thing with the sky that I'll change right now is it's all pretty smooth and kind of airbrushy, and that's because we used airbrushes to paint it, and that's okay. And if you're fine with that, then go with that. But I'm going to switch to the painting brushes here, and I'll switch to the flat brush, and I'm just going to sample this purple here, and I'll make a new layer above the sky, and I'm just going to tap in, just very, very lightly tap in some shapes here. So now we can see we get some of this. It may be hard to see, but some of this edge right here for the brush, we get just a little bit of that texture in here. And I'll do that over here too. So just maybe tap in some of this. In fact, we could probably get a texture brush. Maybe I'll grab this Tarkine brush here and just grab this purple again and just tap in a little bit. And yeah, see, we get that subtle kind of texture in here. I think that helps a little bit. Maybe I'll switch to this brush too here. This is a texture brush. And feel free to use whichever ones. I mean, your textures don't have to look exactly like mine. It really doesn't matter too much which textures, as long as you like how it looks. And that's part of the uniqueness of everybody's painting. It's going to look slightly different from the next person. So embrace that, and feel free to just get creative with it. See, so now it feels more painterly, right? We have this kind of paint stroke up here. This feels a little more painterly, much less like an airbrush feel, and that's just more of what I like. I don't really like the airbrush type feel, so I think this is a little better. Now I will go back to the cloud layer and continue what I was doing for the clouds. So I'm going to go to the airbrushing, go to the soft brush, sample this color here, maybe make it a little more vibrant or more saturated. And I'm just going to paint in the back portions of the clouds, the parts that are furthest away from the sun with this darker, slightly more saturated color. All right, so I'll make a few adjustments to this mountain layer here. I think that I'll go to the round brush and I'll just clean up some of the edges now that we have the clouds in. And maybe I'll erase some of this out right here as well. And now what I can do is make a new layer above layer 10, and I can go to the round brush again, and I'm going to sample this color here for the clouds and make it a little darker and a little less saturated. And I want to paint in some more clouds, except these will be in front of the mountains. So this will kind of hopefully create some overlap here. Maybe I can select this color for the clouds and just, yeah, paint this in with the round brush. So now it feels like these mountains are kind of being surrounded by these clouds right here. And I think that that can work. I think that that can work well. And we can do the same thing for these down here. We want to make these a little darker since they're more kind of in this, I guess, this kind of valley down here. It's not going to pick up as much sunlight. So slightly darker, but we can still get some clouds down here. And maybe I'll have some more on this side over here. And now I just feel like these clouds in the mountains are much more connected rather than before. If we remove this layer, they feel a lot more separate. So this is really optional. You don't have to do this, but I just kind of like how this how these elements feel more connected now. All right, and I'll create a new layer above layer 12, so below this background mountain layer. And I'm just going to make a selection for another mountain in the very far background, because I feel like there could be even more depth in this scene. So I'll sample this color here, and I'm going to very, very lightly press with the round brush, and it creates a shape that's not as opaque, so it picks up some of the color behind it. Maybe I can make it a little darker. I feel like it was a little too light, but I think that works. Maybe I can also go to the erase tool, make sure it's set to the soft brush, and I'll just erase out some of the top part, just very, very softly to create a kind of an atmosphere along the top. I think overall I can go to the cloud layer and just make them all generally more saturated. So we're just going to increase the saturation to about 60%, and we can see what it looks like before and after. Let's just bring some more color into the scene, and I can do that again on layer 14, which is the second layer of clouds. So I'll just bring it up to 60%, to about 60%. 59 is fine. All right, now I'll go to layer 2, which is this mountain layer, the big mountain. Make a new layer above it, set it to clipping mask. I'll go to the brushes, and I will go to airbrushing, which is now we're on the soft brush. So I'll just sample this color here, this lighter color, and I'll just softly paint in along this left side a lighter value. Just because the sun is somewhere down here, this side is just going to get a little bit of that glow from the sun, just as I did the same thing with these clouds here. And so this is before, and now after, it just feels like it has a little more glow to it. All right, so I'll go back to the tree layer. So now we're on layer 4, and I'm just going to desaturate it a little bit. Now that I have those other colors, just feel like it's a little too saturated, to about 47%. And I'll go to layer 3. And I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier. I'll create a new layer above it, set it to clipping mask, sample the darkest color, grab a round brush, set it to about 10% opacity, and just have another wash over it because I feel like it could still be a little darker. And that's before and after, and I just feel like it feels more part of the scene now. And then I'll collapse that layer just to save space. All right, so now one more thing I want to do here is go to the sky layer and adjust some of the values. So again, a lot of what I'm doing here is adjusting values and colors and all of that now that I have the majority of the things in the scene. So I'll go up here to the S-shaped icon, the selection tool, make sure that it's set to freehand, and I'm going to draw in a freehand selection just on the kind of this top half up here of this the sky. Complete the selection by tapping on the gray circle, and then tap on feather, which is right here in the bottom toolbar. And we want to increase the feather amount to maybe about 30%. And what this is doing is, as you can see, the border of the selection is very hard right now, but once we add the feather to it, it softens the border. So it's going to create a gradient with whatever adjustments we make to the selection. So what I'll do is, now that we have this selected, I'll go up here and tap on the adjustments icon, go to the hue, saturation, and brightness sliders, turn down the brightness by about, say maybe 4%. We can see the before and after, maybe 3%. I'll go to 47. And this is just going to darken, and maybe I'll make it more saturated too. So maybe about 55, maybe we'll go to 48% brightness. So just slightly darker and more saturated just on this top portion of the sky. And we can see before and now after. Just get some more color, and it darkens the sky a little bit where I think it should be darkened. So I'll just softly paint in some more of this color here just to have less of that very bright white all in this space, and just kind of confine it to this space down here. All right, so I'll go to layer 15 here, and I'll just duplicate it. So I'm going to swipe to the left and tap on duplicate, and it's just going to make this mountain a little darker than before. And we can combine this layer once we have a value that we like. So now for these final steps, I'm going to create a new layer above everything and just get some birds in here. So I'll select the, tap on the selection tool, and I'll just make these bird shapes, just using these selections. And I'll paint them in. I'll just sample maybe this color here and just paint them in. And you can move them around if you need to. And so now that we have the birds in, there's just one final thing that I want to do. I'll create a new layer above layer 4. Go to the brushes, and I'm going to select the flat brush from the painting section, and I'm going to make some tree branches on these trees. So I'll just select a very, very neutral, warm brown color. So something about here should be fine. And we're on a separate layer, so we can adjust them if we need to. And I'll just paint in these paint strokes for these branches here. Just a few of them kind of coming out of the trees. Maybe we'll have a few in the green, darker green parts of the trees, so we can get some more detail, but also some more value variety in there. And just try to keep these natural. And I try to just start these with like one main branch like this, and then maybe we have another branch coming off of it, and maybe an even smaller branch shooting off the side. And it's okay if your lines are a little messy. In fact, that I find that adds to the kind of natural feel of tree branches. And just build these up. And I think it just really adds a lot more believability to some of the trees here. So now we have those branches in. I'm noticing that this red tree that I painted earlier, these red little bushes, it's a very similar color to the clouds, and it kind of is confusing me a little bit. So I'll go back up to this layer, so layer 6, and I'll just change, go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just change the hue slider to just change the color a little bit. So maybe more of like a purple. I know that doesn't really make sense, but I think that just adds a nice color into the scene. And then I'll just go to the layer icon, tap on the N, and bring down the opacity a little bit, just so it's not as apparent as it was before. And feel free to use whatever color you want for those. It doesn't matter too much. It's just a way for me to get a little pop of color into the scene. But with that, I think this one is about good. I may add a few more details and clean some things up. But again, for the most part, I think we're good here. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and stay creative.